Hi, everybody. Welcome to In Conversation. My name is Jen, and I'm the Programming and Marketing Manager at Elyria Public Library. And today we have with us author Carly West, who will talk a little bit about her process and her book series, The Scholarly Banana. Welcome, Carly.
Hi, thanks for having me. And thanks everybody for coming to this backstage tour of the Scholarly Banana Unpeeled. So in this talk, you will get to see the inner workings of the series. You'll get to know a little bit about me, and you'll understand why and how I create the Scholarly Banana. So I'm going to show you my inspirations behind it. You'll get to see some of the ugly drafts and some of the trial and errors I went through while developing the concept. And finally, you're going to learn how I actually make these books, from the research and the drafting to the sculpture, the photography, writing, editing, all the way through publication. And after all that, if you have questions, I will be happy to answer them. So if you do not already know, the Scholarly Banana, the concept is essentially a mashup of art, humor, and irreverent nerdiness. So as the saying goes, the banana does not fall far from the tree. So it's not a coincidence that that art, humor, nerd triangle is a major part of who I am as a person too. Growing up, I've always loved to make things. I was into visual arts of all kinds, and I was obsessed with anything design related. And just more than anything, I've always just needed just to be creative and weird, I guess. The ultimate activity for me is to imagine fantastical worlds and crazy ideas, and then figure out how I can bring those worlds and fantasies to life so that you can enjoy them too. And I also like to do that with writing. Now, specifically humor writing has always been my jam, and I just wanted to give you a little example of what fun looks like to me. This should explain maybe a little bit of the Scholarly Banana's humor. So what you're looking at here is, in 6th grade, I made this newsletter for myself called The Groove, which reported on and made fun of current events in my school. Now, 11-year-old Carly, she went all out on this. I curated the finest clip art for my articles. I had a classified section, as you can see here, and an advice column called Ask Carly, where I would write in as really clueless people, and then Carly would give them just the absolute worst advice. She would instruct these poor imaginary people just to do the stupidest stuff. And I thought I was just being hilarious. And of course, I had to put a black market section in my newspaper, because what newspaper doesn't have one of those, right? And I just love this part now for nostalgic reasons, because to me, this is a total time capsule. So if you've ever wondered what the hot contraband items were in a middle school in like 1993, apparently spiked bracelets, rubber cement, and co-ed naked t-shirts were on that list. I did not wear those, by the way, in case you're wondering. So going back to that triad, the final part to complete it all for the Scholarly Banana is, of course, the scholarly element, the nerd element. So people like to learn about all kinds of things. I happen to be on team humanities, which basically means cultural studies. Now, this could include a variety of subjects. Humanities includes language, literature, history, art, philosophy, that kind of thing. Now, for me, aside from just being interested in these topics just for their own sake, well, I've actually found that the more I learn about these things, the better ideas I tend to get to make really creative and funny projects. So this triad is so important to me. It becomes this great cycle where it's fueling itself. I love it. This is everything I love to do, that I think I do well. And I've always believed that the things I make from this kind of state can really benefit other people too. So from a young age, I really was serious and determined to get on a career path doing something with this, which is great, but the reality was teenage me, when it was time to pick a path in life, I could not see a practical way forward to actually do this. Now, I just have to tell you, had there been a major in Jim Hensonology, I would have gone with that in a heartbeat. That to me really did embody that, being smart, being funny, being artistic all together. It's exactly what I wanted. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as a bachelor's of Muppet. So I was pretty lost. However, there is such a thing as getting a teaching degree. So I went with the nerd side of me. I embraced the humanities lover in me, and I graduated from Cleveland State University 2005 with a bachelor's in Spanish education. I chose Spanish because I thought it gave me the most bang for my humanities buck. I got a second language out of it. I learned, got linguistics, history in there. You do literature, you study some art. It's all this cultural goodness in one, everything I liked. I was definitely into it. But in case you're wondering, I didn't actually run with the bulls. I'm not that crazy. But I really enjoyed it. I loved the idea of teaching. However, by the time I finished the program at Cleveland State, I also had enough doubts built up to hold off on jumping into a position as a high school Spanish teacher. On top of that, the call of the creative world was becoming really, really hard to ignore. I was starting to suspect that maybe I had given up on those other two parts of that triad a little too soon. I thought, let me take this one last chance just to see if I can find a way to make that work. And then if it doesn't, I'll do what I'll go teach Spanish somewhere. That would be okay too. So after graduating, I then did what many aspiring creative people do at one point or another. I worked wherever. I got a job rolling coins. I stuck labels on popcorn bags. I worked at Caribou Coffee. And I just hoped that eventually, someday, something would work out for me. And eventually it did, as things tend to do. So in 2007, I fell into a job at Wildflower Bakery in Rocky River, Ohio. And I had no pastry experience, absolutely none. But the owner, turned out she had been a French major at Cleveland State, and she and I really clicked. She understood my displaced artist syndrome I was going through, and she gave me the opportunity to learn cake decorating on the job. Now, at this point, you might think I'm just totally off the rails and I'm just on this tangent that has nothing to do with an author talk or writing or publishing, but let me tell you, this experience was absolutely pivotal for me in being able to do what I do now for two big reasons. Okay, reason one. First, being a professional cake decorator really forced me to get comfortable, or at least conditioned, to showing people my work. And, that's a big deal. It did not matter if I was nervous or terrified, which I often was, because, who wants to be judged, right? But the fact was, this was my job, and people would be cranky if they didn't, get their cake. So I learned to get over myself and my fear and just put myself out there, do my best, and push forward, which is sounds easier than it actually is. So that's number one. Number two, and this one's pretty funny. So every day I would go into work and I would put all my creative energy. I'd try my best to make the most creative, illustrative, custom cakes I possibly could do. These were pretty high-end cakes, but within about 24 to 48 hours, everything I did would get eaten. I mean, everything. All that stuff just gone, eaten. And that was awesome. I highly recommend getting a job in cake if you find yourself kind of creatively insecure. The short life cycle of cake really forced me just to throw everything into what I was doing and then put it out and then completely let it go and just get excited and grateful to move on to my next project. And, this is relevant because a decade later, making the Scholarly Banana, going through the draft process that I had to go through, which you're going to see in a little bit, it's really that mindset of throw everything into there, into what you're doing, and then let it go, and then do it again, try it again. That helped me survive all the rounds of drafting and editing and changes I would have to make for years for the Scholarly Banana. And I just wanted to mention that because, who would have thought that cake, of all things, delicious cake, would make a person so, tough, but it really did. And that's why I had to show you this. So on the non-edible front, as my confidence was growing at the bakery bit by bit, I started to make non-edible art again for the first time in a very long time. So my boyfriend back in those days, Ben, who's now my husband, he is an IT guy. And I think being around him, all that technology kind of got into my head, and it really inspired me to try my hand at digital art. So Ben hooked me up with a copy of Photoshop, and I found some online tutorials, and a new hobby was born that has lasted now well over 10 years. So I got into making these really surreal Photoshop collages, which was, what I just was my art at the time. For the heck of it, I opened an online shop on a new website called Etsy. You may have heard of it. I sold prints in galleries around Cleveland, and I was really just kind of owning my identity, kind of newly seized identity as being an artistic person, which is a really big deal to me. I didn't necessarily sell that much, but that's not what it was about. It was really just about experimenting, finding my style, putting myself out there, and just feeling really good making art again and being proud of it. And then one day I made a masterpiece that absolutely changed my entire life. Get ready. By masterpiece, I mean this deranged pink cupcake fellow. So this is 2010, and cupcakes were insanely trendy at the time. So this guy is basically a self-portrait of me during that era. I'll just admit that to you and the entire internet right now. So I really loved this surly, sweet little guy so much that it inspired me to try sculpting him as well. Now, I had not worked with polymer clay since I was a kid, but I remember I had really liked it a lot, so I gave it a shot. So the long story short is that since that pink cupcake, I have created and sold thousands of original character figurines and wedding cake toppers for very nice people all over the world. I left the bakery in late 2011, and I went to go sculpt full time. So my business was called the Republic of Cute, which was known for its cute but mischievous character figurines that had a really strong appeal to both kids and adults. That was really my sweet spot. I sold a lot online, and in 2012, I began participating in a lot of art events around the Cleveland area. For example, some of you watching might have heard of the Cleveland Flea. I was one of the original core vendors during its first 2 or 3 seasons. I did some summer and holiday shows around the area, and I met a lot of friends from doing that, which is very awesome to get out of my little solitary artist cave for a while. And then about 2013, just for fun, I started photographing my figurines. So bring the photography into it. I did this, I'd take them on the street, do some kind of impromptu toy photography. I started making more elaborate Photoshop collages, which was even better this time around because now I had all these colorful models to photograph. So during this time, I began to realize that my sweet spot as a visual artist was not in sculpture. Like, I wasn't a sculptor, and I wasn't a photographer. I wasn't really anything. It was the act of combining all those things together that I really enjoyed. And so the moral of the story here is I have just a thing with combining stuff. And on that note, in 2014, to incorporate more humor into the brand and to give my characters a little bit more personality that people could understand, I wrote a short comic series for the Republic of Q. So once I started getting into the writing and the comics, it seriously was like the lights came on. I felt so good about myself from doing this. And it's not because I was like, oh, I'm the greatest, like this is the funniest, best thing in the world. It was not that. It was because I hadn't done anything with the humor writing since I was, since the groove, and the groove really hadn't circulated, to be honest, outside my parents' living room. So this was a really big deal for me, is to finally put that art with the humor and own that part too. So once I started doing this, the floodgates really opened, and it did not take me long at all for the language teacher nerd in me to join the party. So I couldn't help myself. I slipped a few vocabulary themed comics into the mix. And to me, something just felt so right about including this offbeat academic flavor into my work. And I just wanted to do more, and I wanted to get better. But the problem was the Republic of Cute was not an educational type of brand. It really wasn't, I didn't really develop it to be that. And I didn't have a vision for pivoting it either. So that was back in 2014, 2015, and I wasn't really sure what I could actually do with this, but I was determined to file at the back of my mind and keep my eyes open for an opportunity. So on that note, I'm going to pause there and I'm going to jump you way back. So this is 2002. I think this is even before I had a cell phone, long time ago. And I'm going to bring you back to the exact moment I discovered the wonderful world of folklore studies. I can tell you exactly where I was. I was at the bookstore. It was a Borders in the Westlake Promenade. It was a promenade before it was even Crocker Park. So we're talking ancient times here. And I was just hanging out, browsing around the myth philosophy section as the cool kids do, when a book just jumped out at me from the shelf. Amongst all these highbrow titles that were making me feel very fancy, by the way, as a 21, 22-year-old college student being all smart. Well, I see this book just shining out. It's the classic fairy tales by Maria Tadar. And I just wondered, well, what's a book about fairy tales doing in this sophisticated section? I'd never seen a book about fairy tales before outside of a children's section, so I wanted to give it a look. Now, at that time, I knew that fairy tales were old. Okay, so I got that. I knew fairy tales were old, and I knew that it was more than Disney. I'd heard of the Grimms. I had actually read the Grimm Cinderella before, so I knew that some of them were very dark and violent, but I really didn't know anything other than that. Well, I was just, I'm not going to go there. I was just shocked to see how many different versions there actually were for stories like Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella, Snow White, Beauty and the Beast. I mean, the list goes on and on for different types of tales that are told all across the world in different variations. Much like myths, fairy tales are foundational to almost every story we tell each other today. It's super cool. And what surprised me even more is that these old tales, they weren't dull or stuffy. They were really interesting. And, some, to be honest, just seemed really ridiculous. But that ridiculousness was intriguing to me. It made me want to know more. The best part was that this particular book let me know more. At the back, Maria Tadar included all these critical essays that explained some of this ridiculousness that I was reading and put it in real context so I could understand what was going on. I had no idea that fairy tales could teach us so much about history and gender studies, archetypes, psychology, sociology, literary criticism. So these are all like the highbrow smart people, academic stuff I was learning in college at the time. But here it was about the humble fairy tale. And I thought, dude, this is the coolest thing I have ever seen. That's something so lowbrow that's not traditionally taught in school. So like we learn myths, we learn history of that. But I don't know about you, but like I was never taught about the history of folk tales and fairy tales, at least not enough for me to feel like I had a solid footing on it. Um, you know, and I was just delighted to see that these tales that we all know, they just have so much value in it. You know, not everybody reads classic literature, but we all know who Little Red Riding Hood is, at least in one form or another. And I just love that even playing field. I like that these are folk tales, they're for folks, and that there's so much delight in finding cool little historical tidbits in these stories that we can all relate to. So anyway, I'm going to stop at there because I could probably go on for another 40 minutes, but okay. Point is, I've been collecting folk tales and fairy tale books since that time in 2002. It's been almost 20 years now. So now I'm going to zip back to the year 2014 and show you how this Scholarly Banana thing actually got going. So 2014, let me take a deep breath because this was a very, very hard year for me. Let me just collect myself. So Ben has a tradition, my husband, where every year on my birthday, he takes me on a bookstore crawl and just like, hey, go nuts. He's a very nice husband, but I actually think he thinks it's funny to watch me like scamper around like a fool. But anyway, we've done this since about 2005 or 6. And of course, the first place I always go to, I go right to the myth and folklore section, and it's happy birthday to me. Let me add something to my collection of these crazy, creepy tales. But on this particular year 2014, I could not find any books I wanted. You know, everywhere we went, it was the same stuff. I either had it or it was so similar to what I had. I basically had it. And that really made me sad that I didn't want any of it. And I was like, what am I gonna do? Like, it's my birthday. I came here for books and I don't even want anything. This is pretty bad. So as I was running through the phases of grief, you know, trying to cope with this, it actually got me thinking. I'm like, okay, I clearly am in the mood for a folklore book. I'm always in the mood for one. But if I don't want any more of these particular books, then what do I want? And I thought, well, maybe if I can define what I'm looking for, that will help me find something. So I thought it would be amazing to find a fairy tale history book that you might find in a young adult section, actually, because I really wanted something that was very down to earth, very easy to read. I wanted a lot of illustrations. I wanted it to be very well designed. I wanted it to be awesome to look at and breezy. Like, I'm not reading this for a PhD. Like, I'm reading this because I think it's fun. I think the information's interesting. I'm a reader, reading for pleasure here. So I wanted something that was a little bit more casual. But the trick was, I didn't want a censored book. You know, I didn't want anything dumbed down just because it was approachable. I wanted the legit academic stuff from the legit academic books. I wanted that information. It's just I wanted it cloaked in a little different way. I wanted some pictures and maybe some jokes and just to have a more lighthearted approach to talking about it. But the information be just as valid. So basically I was looking for an easy to read, well-designed, entertaining book about folklore for people who are not babies and are not PhD students. So I figured that's a lot of people, you know, and everyone can relate to these stories, as I've said. So I figured there's got to be something out there. And well, I looked for years. I never found anything close to what I wanted. You know, I was a reader hunting for a book, basically, and couldn't. It was just constantly disappointed. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'm sure you know where this is going so slowly. It did occur to me bit by bit that I might actually be the perfect person to make this mashup of a series. Never mind the fact I had no idea how to do it, like none. I also didn't have a real clear plan of what it would even look like. Um, what I had was simply a gut feeling that wouldn't go away of how I wanted the book to feel. But I knew if I could somehow wrangle that feeling and by some miracle make it into a book, then that book could help so many people discover how cool these crazy stories are. And you know, they would get a lot of good stuff out of it too. So in 2016, finally broke down and I started brainstorming ideas for a series about fairy tales that would be funny and artistic and just totally nerdy without you necessarily knowing it's that nerdy. And yeah, 3 years later, to my amazement, I published that series and it's called The Scholarly Banana. So on that note, let me introduce you to my little yellow friend. So The Scholarly Banana is a comedic graphic novel series for teens and adults that retells old dark fairy tales and tricks you into learning fun facts about them. Now, of course, I cannot talk about my series without talking about the art style. It's what some people tend to notice first, quite naturally. So it kind of looks like old school claymation, and that is very intentionally done because I love old school claymation, and I grew up absolutely enamored with those old stop motion Christmas specials like the Rudolph, the Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I just loved how dreamy and surreal they looked. I just loved them. I always wanted to touch them. And, you know, that continued into adulthood. And since I was a sculptor and a photographer, hey, it worked. So that's why I went with that. And my illustrations, therefore, are, I create them with handmade sculptures and photography. So it's a look that's very rare in books. Maybe when I get into the process, you might see why a little bit, but you know, I absolutely love how it looks. So that is why we have it that way. Now, another part of the series, since this is a scholarly banana. So a lot of people look at that art and they say, well, is this for children? I say, have you seen the bloody banana on the cover? Nah, heck no, it's not for kids. He's scholarly. I don't censor the stories. I don't censor the research because of that element I want. I want it to be a legitimately academic book for people who are in the stage of life where they like to think about things. So it's not for kids. Sorry, kids. You know, kids have enough fairy tale books already. And I created the Scholarly Banana especially for the forgotten audience of folklore. Average teens and adults. You know, I wanted this to be a book for people who are curious about these classic stories, and they would just be open to having a fun and zippy way to learn really interesting stuff about them, and also have a really crazy good time doing that. So speaking of crazy good times, the banana is really where that playfulness comes in. He binds the series together, and he is our friendly companion and scholarly sidekick on our adventures. Now, a lot of people ask me what role he plays. Now, he is pretty much like our class clown. He will jump in and out of the stories to make comments, and he also plays a character in every story retelling. He was an evil wizard in Fitchersburg, and in the Juniper Tree, he was a sweet little girl named Marlene. So he's very interactive in there. Just our little buddy that is a very active imagination that inserts himself right into the tale. So that's what he is all about. So now that you've gotten to know the banana, I'm going to actually break down the series itself for you, which is set up a little bit different than a traditional graphic novel. I usually refer to this as a graphic novel series just because I can. Honestly, graphic novel is a really general term. But this one has chapters. It's broken out into 4 specific parts. So we always start with an intro that will set you up with any background information I think will be helpful for you to have in mind before you go into the story, so you're not going in totally cold on it. Then we will move into a funny retelling of the story, complete with side commentary and ridiculous observations, of course. It's one of my favorite parts. So I wanted to tell you a little tidbit inside how this is built. So when I'm composing this section, I'm imagining that you and I are buddies. We are hanging out and we are simply discussing what's going on in the story. So when something bonkers happens, for example, in this scene in the juniper tree, there's a boy who's reaching into a fruit chest for an apple, and his evil stepmother creeps up behind him and she slams the lid down, and the boy's head flies clean off. You know, clean cut, guillotine style, boom shakalaka. You know, that is absolutely awful. I know it's awful, it's gross. But if we can be honest for a second, that's also really insane. And I think that we would talk about that. How could we not talk about that? So we'd have some questions now, wouldn't we? For example, why is this fruit bin so freakishly sharp? How many people a year do you think get their hands cut off in fruit chest accidents? Where on earth did the family even get this chest that is capable of decapitating a child? This is insane. So my books revel in these types of questions because these are the things I believe we are all actually wondering to ourselves. So I feel, why not call them out and play with them a little bit? And that playfulness is that banana element. The scholarly banana, this is the banana. On that note, let's talk about the scholarly part. So to me, this section is where the series concept was born. This is the heart of the scholarly banana. This is a wild, zippy romp that highlights all of the interesting facts and research I have found pertaining to the tale. So as I've hinted at before, or even outright said, my favorite thing about folklore studies is discovering those little details in the stories that we might have initially dismissed as being total nonsense, or just being like, oh, that's just weird. And finding out that they actually have a sincere purpose or historical explanation or something behind them. So for example, I'm going to take you right back to that apple chest incident. So when I first read the juniper tree, I thought this has to be the most random and crazy way to kill off a character that I've ever seen. It's like death by fruit bin. It's so weird. And, you know, and that's really all I thought in the first read through, is just, this is weird. And, you know, because this scene is so weird, it was really easy for me to totally overlook a pattern. The pattern being that apples are a really big deal in the story. If you pay attention, you will see in the juniper tree that apples appear 3 different times, and they are always very closely associated with a desire, or desiring something, wanting something, and death. And as soon as you realize what kind of story the juniper tree is, all these death apples, well, they actually start to take on a very different tone. The juniper tree is a Christian story. It is packed with Christian symbolism, and which you would not necessarily pick up reading through this story, for a lot of reasons. If you read it, you'll understand why I'm saying that. In many religious paintings, the apple is often portrayed as the forbidden fruit in the Bible. Thus, the boy in the juniper tree was not reaching into a chest of potatoes or carrots or Cheetos. The apple was likely a very deliberate choice, because when you interpret this with a biblical lens, this is a warning against forbidden knowledge and temptation. With that in mind, it's not that random anymore in this deeply religious story to have a chest full of apples cause someone's death. And the whole point of the scholarly section is really about challenging those perceptions. Initially I thought it was weird, but then you learn more about it and you're like, oh, okay, I see this differently now. I understand this differently now. And it just gives you a different perspective on things. And I am just delighted always to find that there's more to these stories than we initially assume, and to look deeper. So that's what scholarly section is about. Now, by the time you're done with the intro, the story, and the scholarly section, congratulations, you will actually be very expert in this tale. So get your ticket to Jeopardy, and I think you'll do really well if there's a folklore section for you. Now, don't tell the banana, but these fairy tales, in their kind of archaic, outdated craziness, the actual stories to me are the real stars here. So in my retellings, I do stay very true to the events. I'm not, I'm playing with the events, but I'm not overtly changing plot elements, because I love the plot elements. So what better way to wrap things up than to include an original version here, so you can enjoy it for yourself. And that was really important to me too, because I'm not looking to come in and replace. The point of this is to celebrate these old stories, and really get as much out of them as we can. So that is that. That is the contents of the book. So now that you know how it kind of about me, you know what the Scholarly Banana is, I am now going to bare my soul to you and show you some of my blooper reel. Now, designing this series was not a straightforward process. I was looking for something very unusual. So because of that, there weren't very many models out there for me to go and try to emulate, if that makes sense. So in the beginning, I had a lot of experimenting to do to find the right look and the right vibe for me. So I'm going to show you a little bit of how I got started and the discovery process for getting the series designed. So this right here is my, these three images on the top are the very first attempts at the Scholarly Banana. So these are 3 pages from an old Little Red Riding Hood story. Now, because I had the most experience as a visual artist at that time, the very first thing I did was to experiment with the illustrations only. So these are essentially, like, this is public domain text that I am simply trying to pair with an image, and to see how possible would it be to do my ideal art form, which was that sculpture and photography. So I had never actually designed a set before that, and I had been a professional sculptor for years, but I had actually never had to make a character that had to change positions ever, and so that was a little mind-boggling for me. And with all that, I also had never made a book or designed a book, so therefore, this is as far as I got. I got 3 whopping pages, and I don't even know how long this took me. And I absolutely, positively had to stop. As much as I wanted to just plow through and use sculpture for the artwork, I had no clue how I would ever do it. there were no tutorials out there that showed me the process for this. And I had so many questions like, how would I edit this thing? Do I seriously need to make like a character for each different position? Like, how would I even do that? The whole concept was just blowing my mind. And aside from that, I had a much bigger problem, namely that I didn't know how to design a book of any kind, much less one with a very ambitious art style. So, oh, and I didn't know what I was making either. Another minor problem. So, okay, in order to figure all that out, I moved away from sculpture for over a year. And even though that's what I had as my ideal vision, I put that on pause and I said, I'm going to take time and I'm going to focus on any other skill I need to acquire, and I'm going to play around with different art mediums, because who knows, maybe sculpture isn't the best. Maybe I'll find something that works better. I just was committed to keeping a very open mind and being a very experimental to see what worked. Now, the most important thing to me for the art is I needed these new illustrations to give me wonderful features like an eraser, which you don't have if you sculpt. So yeah, I have a banker's box full of drafts with just traditional illustration and collage. And during this time, I just really honed my skills. I worked on my design fundamentals. I practiced anything I could think of. Writing, I practiced storyboarding and page design. I researched the publishing industry and all of my different options. Studied humor and just looked for more inspirations of how I could make this series the best it could be, and to figure out what it was. Yeah, I felt really incompetent most of the time. I'm just going to tell you that. Because it always looks easy when it's done, but believe me, every single day it felt like I was running up a wall. And that phase lasted for a couple years until finally my skills did level up enough that I was able to put things together and make real drafts, get more than 3 pages done without crying. Do more, get a little closer bit by bit. And lo and behold, in 2018, I leveled up enough that I was able to revisit sculptural illustration again and give my hand a try at that and go back, which only a few years before had seemed utterly impossible to me. So that was a big deal. I was still nowhere near the point I needed to get to, but I was closer. And that's always the thing that you go for, but I was closer. So in case you were wondering about the stories I choose, because that's a really common question, and I had a bunch of them in mind because, at the get-go, one thing I knew for certain was that this was going to be a series of books. This was not going to be a one and done, like, oh, I just love Fitcher's Bird, I'm just going to do one about Fitcher's Bird and then be off on my merry way. No, I saw this being a series from the beginning, and each book being a deep dive into a different tale. So in order to prove my concept to myself that it could work across multiple books and stories, I, in my drafting, would bounce between 3 different fairy tales. I experimented with Little Red Riding Hood, the Juniper Tree, and the last one I picked up was Fitcher's Bird, which ironically actually ended up being my first book. So I chose Fitcher's Bird as my first book for a very simple reason, and it just happened to be the one I was working on when I was ready to put out the book. I was learning so much, and I just happened to be drafting Fitcher's Bird when I got that light bulb moment that I was like, okay, I can push the series forward. I'm ready to seriously put out something. And Fitcher's Bird sculptures happened to be in the best shape. So they got first dibs of publication. and I published Fitchersbird in April, on April 20th, 2019. So that was book one. I currently have two books in series, Fitchersbird, which is published 2019, and my second book, which is just published in not too long ago, January of this year, which is the Juniper Tree, and I'm currently working on a third book. So I am going to switch gears a little bit, and instead of showing you the things that did not work, I'm going to show you the solutions and what does work, how I actually build these books. At least this is what I did for the Juniper Tree. So step one in creating the Scholarly Banana is the research. Now, this is really important to do beforehand and before committing, because not every fairy tale has a ton of research associated with it. So I need to make sure that there's enough interesting information available so the scholarly section can really shine and be really enlightening and entertaining and really give you the most bang for your buck on that. Now, a little side note is I shout out to libraries. We love our libraries. I depend on my library for my research. I use a service called OhioLink for all of my research materials. So OhioLink is a library service that allows me, normal person, just in the community, to borrow books from Ohio colleges and libraries. And this is a beautiful thing for me because I know then that the scholarly tidbits I'm pulling from these books have actually been vetted by those educational institutions. I'm not just Googling things and going on Wikipedia. I want the scholarly section to make Maria Tadhar proud. Maria, if you're listening, I hope this makes you proud. It's a very important to me. So that is the research. The second part and the first production part is the outline, sketches, and very, very ugly drafts. So this is really just kind of getting the flow of the story, breaking it down into concepts of what's happening on what page, and then seeing if I have an idea for what I'd like the images to be. You know, I'm kind of doing both at the same time, and I'll go through this many times. I think for the Juniper Tree, I had, oh gosh, I don't remember how many drafts. I think it was about 20 of these drafts done before I felt ready to move on. And this is really just to get myself a head start, so I'm not just diving into the story with no idea where I'm going. You know, that was the big mistake I made back in 2016 with that Little Red Riding Hood draft. Is I was just like winging it, like page one, all right, let's do page one. Page two, okay, page two, now time for page three. Like, no, you do not make a book like that. You absolutely need to plan. And that's one thing I learned in those years of trial and error was planning. This is the planning before I get going. So you can see it doesn't all look very nice. It's really just getting it all out of my brain and organizing thoughts. It's not meant to look good. Now, once I have my thoughts organized enough and a good idea of what I'm working with, specifically the characters I need, I will start sculpting pretty early. Now, in case you are curious about the art supplies, these are my favorite tools and materials for the sculptures and the set building. The most notable thing on this page let me direct you to wherever the bottom left corner is on your screen here, the polymer clay, which is my sculpting material. It's what I use to sculpt my characters. Polymer clay, if you do not know, is a material that you can mold and it bakes hard in just a regular home oven or a toaster oven. So it's really good in that, because it bakes hard, like I'm not going to squish them. That's awesome. So, you know, I can sculpt them and they'll stay resilient in my hands. But the bad part is that I can't bend them. And to tell a story, the characters obviously need to well, maybe not obviously, but to tell a story, the characters will have to assume different poses and different expressions. So I developed some sneaky little tricks to do that. The main cast of characters, they all have detachable heads, which means that I can tilt them or swap them out if I need to. I also never put arms on their bodies. The arms are coils of soft, unbaked clay that lets me position the arms as I'm photographing them, which is really great because I can experiment with different positions if something's like not right or doesn't, you know, maybe I need a little more space here or there. It gives me the flexibility to do that on the fly. And the great thing is that I can really get a lot of expressions in a character with just a slight tilt of head and a thoughtful arm gesture, which is fantastic. This modular method of sculpting saves me from having to make like 400 finished figurines. So thank goodness about that. So while the main characters that you just saw are workhorses, and I put a lot of time and a lot of care into them, the minor characters don't always get the same treatment, and I just wanted to point this out to you because why not show everybody my mess here, right? So sometimes I will need a completely random thing sculpted, and I'll just need it for one stinking page. And you know, this could be a stork, it could be a bucket of nails, a mop. It's seriously could be anything. But the thing is, these will only appear in one shot. And the finishing work I put into that often reflects that. So for example, the hedgehog guy here doesn't have a back because you will never see this. The tower on the top isn't even baked. It's made from raw clay, and it also doesn't have a back. And it is also a toilet paper roll. So fun fact about that. Now, that is pretty much the sculpture. And of course, we need to get these sculptures onto the page. We do that through photography. So this part is going to be about photographs. So while the writing and I'm writing and I'm sketching constantly because that part never stops. So you know, I'm still in that draft phase, kind of, you know, churning out ideas. But once I have those sculptures made and those physical props done, that means I can treat myself to a photograph or two or like 200 of them. Now, aside from writing and editing, this is where most of the production work happens. And I want to call your attention to the fact that I've called these photo drafts. So I'm still experimenting. I just want to be able to use my actual medium, so like the clay, to see on a page and then get more accurate feedback about what it looks like. Because obviously there's a lot of difference between how it looks on page in a pencil sketch versus a sculpted figurine that is lit and photographed. So I'm going to show you that in just a second. But first, if you are curious, this is my photo gear. It's actually pretty straightforward. It's really just a digital camera and small LED lights, and then something to hold them steady. So that covers the materials for that. Now, the procedure of doing this is to always go into my photography with a plan for each scene. I'll usually make 3 to 5 sketches just to try out and compose and light them and make notes for where the text is going to go. So I'm always experimenting with different camera angles and such. And again, this is very drafty. I'm just trying to get the most creative shots out here I can. So with each round of photography, I'm working out my thoughts. I'm always pushing for better ideas, and bit by bit, I will refine these very rough drafts into actual pages. So I'm going to show you now a few examples of how these pages can morph from a sketch to the finished page and a sculpted piece. So This first one here is really the easiest example. It's very straightforward. You know, mostly thanks to the big black sky in the background and just a very simple character. There really wasn't anything to account for like prop wise. So it translated very well, as you can see. You know, sometimes there's minor changes I'll make from the idea, maybe pull back or pull forward, maybe, you know, angle up or down. That's very common. Another very common adjustment I make a lot is accommodations because of text. So text, I think the rule of thumb is that text is going to take up about 3 times the amount of space that you think it will. And if you can see on the left, like, I don't know what on earth I was thinking here. These rectangles are supposed to mark where that side column is going. You know, clearly I had gone insane. I don't know why I thought that was going to fit. I probably didn't think it was going to fit. I was probably just being lazy. But anyway, it did lead me to having to shoot this scene pulled further back to accommodate the text and have it readable. So this one is a little more complex example, and I wanted to show you this one really quick just because it gives you more of a glimpse into my writing process as well. It hits on both. So I am both the illustrator and the writer. Consequently, I am always asking myself, where does something work best? Does a piece of information I want to give to you, or does a joke work better in the text or in the image? And what happens is that sometimes something that starts off as a visual joke will get integrated into the text, or vice versa. So what you're looking at here is a scene from the juniper tree. Now, there is a bird outside the house who is singing about a murder that this evil stepmother has committed. And the woman knows that there's a bird here to kill her, and she's afraid. But the bird is giving out presents, so that kind of complicates things for her because she's very greedy and wants a gift. So this page is showing what the woman is imagining, that this wonderful, you know, that the woman, she's imagining all these imaginary presents that she might get. So I thought, what could be so awesome that it would lure somebody outside to their death? So that's what you're looking at here in this left sketch. So the image on the thing in the right is a bag of gold. In the center, the thing that looks like beans or peas, I think that was supposed to be jewels. And then that oval-faced thing is supposed to be a pony. And also, it's a good thing I sculpted this book and not sketched it, right? So anyway, I liked the fact that the evil stepmother could be expecting a pony. I thought that was really funny. But the issue was that I didn't think this design that I sketched would actually translate well in a sculpture. So what I did was kept the concept of the page and the joke. So her imagining these awesome gifts, and I kept the thinker pose of her, you know, showing you what she's doing, that's the action that she's considering these things. But I moved the pony joke into the text. So it says here, after much consideration, her choice is clear. She gathers her courage, silences her intuition, and goes outside to get what's coming to her. Maybe it's a pony. Did it? So that's how something that did not work as an oval-faced sketched pony ended up being the punchline in the final page. So it still was used. So that hopefully gives you kind of a glimpse into that back and forth. Now, the next part of the process, so we're coming to the end of this, would be Photoshop. Now, this is the tool that I use to edit my photos from the earliest draft stages all the way through the final output. And it's a really good thing I like Photoshop so much because I'm in it a heck of a lot, and I'm now going to show you just a few things I do with it. So for every image I work with, no matter how drafty of a phase I'm in, I will always convert the photo to black and white. Like, why is that? The reason is color makes things look a heck of a lot better than they actually are. And right now, I don't want that. I don't want this image to look better. I need to know if I need to reshoot this image. So I need to pay attention to a few details. Like I'm asking myself, is this idea weak? How does the composition look? Is my lighting okay? Like where's that horizon line hitting her? You know, it's hitting her right here. Do I want that? You know, maybe with a slight tilt of the camera, it could be hitting her in a place, that line could be hitting her in a place that maybe doesn't look quite as clean. So those are the little details I'm watching out for, and seeing it in black and white really helps me do that. So that's a little design trick for you, little artists out there. So I actually then keep my photos in black and white, which is something that surprises a lot of people. I actually hand paint all of my colors in Photoshop. It's painted. These are black and white painted photos. I do this because it gives me consistent colors throughout my book, and painting on layers gives me a lot of flexibility. It's very easy for me to change a color at any time. And I like how it looks. You know, there are thousands of ways to adjust colors in Photoshop, and this is definitely not a typical one, but it really does work well for me. So while I photograph as many real, like practical setups as possible, there are a few things I always add in digitally. So I draw the pupils and the eyebrows and the speech balloons in with Photoshop brush, and the banana's arms are drawn as well. So things like rainbows, stars, clouds, snow are all digital. And I am pretty hardcore about my work, but I draw the line with setting my sculptures on fire. I don't want to burn my house down, so the flame is a Photoshop element. And there is also the retouching. So if you look on the top right here, those yellow dots are marking where I would retouch something out. I just wanted to draw attention to that area so you can see things that call my eye to it, that I would go in digitally and clean that up. So the main offenders that get retouched are toothpicks and wires that are holding my sculptures in place. And there's usually some elements of surface cleanup. Because in photos, photos really bring out all the grime and muck. And, you know, just like people, you know, sometimes my characters get blemishes or some sort of yuck on their face. So I cleaned it up for you so it's not distracting. Now, the very final step in the production process is the dreaded InDesign. I find InDesign, you know, I could go on and on about my love for Photoshop. We're just going to keep this InDesign one nice and brief. You might guess my feelings for it by this cover image here. So InDesign is a publishing software. It is where my text lives. It's a very tricky program to learn, so it's probably where my feelings come in about it. But you know, it's also really important though, and I spend a heck of a lot of time in InDesign. So I will end up exporting this document to my printer. So this is how the book gets put together. What you're looking at here on this page is the layout for the juniper tree. So this is what the juniper tree looks like on my side before I send it off to get printed into a book. Now, this layout is more than just practical for, like, you know, printing stuff. I am in here all the time, hawkeyeing every little detail, because when you have a book, you absolutely have to consider how a page looks next to another page and how it flows with the page after that and after that and after that. And there's a certain rhythm that goes on. You know, these are not isolated works of art that just live on their own and just can only need to look good by themselves. No, no, no. They have to look good by its neighbor, and then by the other neighbor on the back, and then it's got to feel good for zooming in and out and checking the colors. So the tricky part here is because I'm constantly getting new ideas and I really am drafting all the time. I'm always swapping things out. Um, it's a lot of moving pages to keep track of, and the rhythm is always changing. That is definitely one of the more challenging parts of it, but it's probably one of the most important and the most fulfilling. So I just wanted to show you that that part of it. It kind of feels like this crazy puzzle dance of InDesign, and it feels like it's never going to end. And but lo and behold, sometime it will. It does end. I can tell you that for sure because it happened for me twice. So we have 2 books here. So when I'm finally happy with the book, then we can just go right on to the publishing part. So I'm going to keep this part a little bit brief. My publisher is Semper Ridiculum, which is me. I decided I wanted to go the independent route from the beginning, just because I knew I had a very avant-garde book and I wanted to see it through and see what I could do with it, to see if that gut feeling I had, I wanted to see how much I could make it sing and get out there and be the exact thing I wanted with no compromise and see what that happens. So that's why I started with indie. And you know, it's been a great experience. My books are available anywhere books are sold. They are printed on demand and distributed through a company called Ingram Spark. So yeah, you can get them through the libraries, you can get them through independent bookstores, other big retailers. It's a pretty exciting innovation that we have now. So at this time, I'm now working on my 3rd book. This is going to be a trio of Little Red Riding Hood versions. So that's a little sneak peek of what to come. Yeah, right now you can get 2 books in the Scholarly Banana series, Fitcher's Bird and the Juniper Tree. Little Red Riding Hood will be available when I finish it. Who knows when that's going to be? No, that should be, hopefully that'll be sometime, I'm aiming for next year. We'll see how that goes. It's going to be finished when I look like that boy and it's finished. So I'll check in with you. But if you want to keep up with my progress, I do post on Instagram at the Carly West. And I do have a blog that I post on occasionally that you can find at thescholarlybanana.com. So that wraps everything up. And I just want to thank Jennifer and Elyria Public Libraries for having me.
Thanks, Carly. Great work. It was such a nice overview to see your whole entire process and a window into who you are even.
Oh.
So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. So if anybody has any other questions, you would be able to contact us at the Elyria Public Library through our Facebook page or through the comments on the YouTube channel. And don't forget to stay tuned to our YouTube channel for more programs as well. Thank you.
Thanks.